and welcome to Learning with Lulu. In this video we are going to be doing a summary of chapter 12 in Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. Before we begin, if you have been using these Scarlet Letter chapter summary videos, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and share with others that you know may find use out of these as well. At the end of the video, don't forget to comment your thoughts and like as well. So, chapter 12, Dimmesdale was staying up during the night, during one of his all-night vigils. He's in a lot of spiritual, mental, emotional pain because he is so weighed down by the guilt of being the other equal party in Hester's committing the sin of adultery. But he is revered as a unspotted reverend, and Hester initially was ostracized from the community. So, chapter 12, we see Dimmesdale walking up the steps of the scaffold where he is going to stand and almost kind of try and bare his heart and the truth publicly, even though it's the middle of the night, so very few, if any people are out. And as he's on the scaffold, he lets out a heart-wrenching cry. And it is so loud that he thinks it's sure to wake people in town. So he really isn't trying to just stand up there and be quiet and be like, oh, I'm gonna feel better. He isn't afraid of drawing attention to himself. Some people do hear the cry, but they just chalk it up to being witches, obviously. Yeah, no one comes out because of the cry. Now, despite it being the middle of the night, Dimmesdale does see people out. One of the people he sees is Reverend Wilson, who I believe was just at someone's deathbed. And Dimmesdale, he's a little unhinged right now, and he thinks he calls out to Reverend Wilson to be like, hey, look where I am. This is because I'm guilty, this kind of thing. But he didn't, I don't believe he actually did call out to Reverend Wilson, because he just continues on by and doesn't even notice Dimmesdale up there. And that shouldn't be that surprising. Middle of the night, probably very little light pollution at the time. And Reverend Wilson, he was just at the deathbed of, I believe it was Governor Winthrop. And he was the colony's first governor. And so he was just at someone's deathbed. His mind is not on necessarily perhaps taking in his surroundings. I'm sure his mind is very absorbed with the death of perhaps a long-known acquaintance or maybe even friend of his. Essentially, it was a really close call. Another reverend, almost saw Dimmesdale standing up there, and he starts to think about, what would happen if I was known publicly for my guilt. In this thought, he laughs aloud again. He's a little delusional right now. And in his laugh is responded by another laugh, and it's little Pearl. Hester had also been at Winthrop's deathbed, and of course, everywhere she goes, Pearl goes. And so they are also leaving and passing by the same way. Dimmesdale laughs and Pearl laughs in response. The reason Hester had been there was because she, of course, being the community's favorite and very talented seamstress, was asked to make the governor's burial robe. Dimmesdale sees Hester and Pearl, and he invites them to join him on the scaffold. It's almost like he's trying to make restitution by standing up on the scaffold with them. And it's this, moment of a child and her mother and father standing on the scaffold. And this time he's there with them rather than, some reverend up above looking down on them in condemnation. Even though that wasn't necessarily the way he was looking down on them, but that was, the placement of it. So the three of them, they hold hands, and it says that Dimmesdale, I think he describes it almost like an electric chain And I think he's comforted by this, by their presence, and by having them there with him. And perhaps the fact that now, while they are standing on the scaffold this time, he's with them. And then Pearl, very sweetly, you can very much tell that she is completely aware of the reality of the situation. It's apparent to her, even though it's not apparent to the rest of the community. But it's apparent to her who her father is. And very sweetly, very innocently, she asks her father, Reverend Dimmesdale, she says, "Are you going to stand here tomorrow with Mother and me?" He says, "No, like I'm not going to, not this time." And so Pearl presses him, and she says, like, "Well, when?" And he says, "At Judgment Day, I'll stand with you and Mother like this." And in that moment, a meteor brightens the sky, and the text talks about how, you know, it was very common to look at events in the sky, the hieroglyphs of, you know, the heavens, as a telling of human events and human fate. And Dimmesdale especially views all events of the universe as speaking of his fate. Dimmesdale looks up, he sees the light and the trail left behind from this meteor, and to him he sees the kind of glowing red of the letter A. And of course, you know, that speaks to him of his guilty letter A that's buried and hidden, but right now it's being sprawled across the heavens. Which, as a note there, Hester has borne her trials so well. She has borne her scarlet letter so well. I believe the text does even say that people in the community, they don't even necessarily look at the scarlet letter as standing for adultery anymore. Because she is the regal and kind and giving person that she is, I think they even start to say that the letter A stands for able, like someone who is able to provide and comfort others. And at that same time, little sweet Pearl, again, she has noticed someone across the way, and she points at them. And of course, the person watching from afar is none other than Chillingworth. So if he was already certain of what he had guessed at, but now it's even more obvious. Yes, Dimmesdale is Pearl's father. He is standing up on the scaffold with Hester and Pearl all holding hands right now. In that moment, Dimmesdale asks Hester, and he just says, "Who is this? Like, who is that? What is going on with this guy?" And of course, she's sworn to secrecy, and she can't say, "Yeah, that's actually not a Roger Chillingworth. That's my first husband." She doesn't say that because she kept to her oath to not. Pearl, she says to her dad, she says, I know who it is. And Dimmesdale bends his ear down for Pearl to tell him. But what she whispers in his ear is just, you know, made up child language. Dimmesdale says, like, are you trying to mock me? Like, no, I really want to know. And Pearl says, like, well, you're not going to stand with Mom and me tomorrow, so I'm not going to tell you who that is, even though I know. At this point, Chillingworth does finally approach, and he says, you know, "Dimmesdale, come down. You must have sleepwalked up here. Like, let's get you home." So, you know, he's playing the part of the safe, nurturing doctor. Dimmesdale says, "How did you know where to find me? Like, why were you here? How'd you come across this?" And Chillingworth says he also was at Governor Winthrop's deathbed and leaving from there. So this whole nighttime scene concludes with Chillingworth and Dimmesdale going back to the home that they both live at. The next day, Dimmesdale gives a really moving, powerful sermon. After the sermon, a black glove was found by the church sexton, and it's Dimmesdale's, and he returns it to him and he says, "This was found on the scaffold." He knows it's the Reverend's, but he says, "You know, the devil must have put it there, because I know this is yours, but, you know, I don't know why it would be on the scaffold, but I found it and here it is." Then the very last mention in the chapter is this man who found the glove. He says that also everyone in town, there were, not everyone, but there were more people that also saw the meteor and saw this scarlet letter A in the sky. But unlike Dimmesdale, they don't take it to mean anything having to do with Hester or him. The townspeople believe it to stand for angel, because Governor Winthrop passed away, and so an angel came to retrieve him into the heavens. That concludes chapter 12. There's the chapter summary for you. If you have any thoughts on the chapter, any thoughts on the characters mainly featured in this chapter, so Pearl, Hester, Dimmesdale, and Chillingworth, comment your thoughts on them down below. I especially love Pearl in this chapter. I love how innocent and sweet she is when she's like, this is my dad, are you going to stand with us as a family and kind of own up to the fact that you're my father tomorrow? And he says no, and he says he will do so at Judgment Day, which religion aims to comfort with the idea of saying like, hey, this is what is going to happen after death, but really no one knows. And of course, I think there's a lot of value in having hope and faith and belief, and I have a lot myself. But none of us actually know what happens after death. And so of course this little 3-year-old, then when her dad is expecting her to tell her something, I love that she responds by just speaking gibberish and being like, yeah, well, you said you weren't going to stand with mom and me tomorrow. So I love Pearl in this chapter. Let me know your thoughts on her behavior. And with that being said, subscribe, like, share, and keep coming back for more Scarlet Letter chapter summaries. That being said, hope to see you back around, and bye.